Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Studio Insights, a podcast from Prevost Studio. I'm Tyler Kern, joined as always today by Peter Prevost, President and Director of Design at Prevost Studio. Peter, welcome to another episode of the show. How are you doing?
Hey, doing good.
Good. So today we are talking about studio spaces in corporate spaces. So what do we mean by that? We're going to talk about why companies and businesses are investing in this and some of the benefits that might not be readily apparent. We're going to dive into all of these things. If that intro didn't make sense, don't worry. We're going to flesh it all out in much, much more detail. And luckily, Peter is here to help me out with that. So Peter, talk us through, why are companies doing projects like this? Why are companies putting in media rooms, studios, places like that into their facilities right now? What's some of the why behind that?
Yeah, I think the biggest why is video content. And that video content is being produced in, quantities that we really haven't seen before. And so companies are using video specifically to do kind of one of two things, kind of internal communications or external communications, or both. Mm-hmm. And so what do I mean by that? Internal communications would be more like, there's a quarterly C-suite address to the, internal organization, or quite frankly, it could be like internal training around certain things. External would be more, external communications are more, it could be training. It could be training for, potential clients. It could be instruction. It could be thought leadership around whatever industry that company is in. And I think that companies, now that video has kind of evolved as a communication medium, it's a lot cheaper than what it used to be. It's a lot faster. And now I think what we're seeing a need is, one, just developing and building those kinds of spaces, but then also aligning the brand look and feel across that new platform. Because sometimes there's, video's been around forever, right? For a while, but not in the way it has currently developed. But
it's been a lot more democratized recently, right? Like, absolutely. More people are creating video.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, brands that were doing video 5, 6, 7 years ago, they have, a set, or let's just say an environment that, now that video has become much better, the technology around it to produce it is a lot easier. Oftentimes what they had before versus what they need doesn't match their brand anymore. And so what we try to do is help realign the look and feel of that content with what the brand is currently. And then, more importantly, or just as importantly as kind of aligning the brand, is kind of giving clients, or giving our clients that are now broadcasters interesting spaces, but also spaces that help them present their content in better ways, whether it's a touchscreen, on-air touchscreen display, or, setting up a more intimate one-on-one, things that are pretty easily achievable, but you just have to kind of design it into the space.
Yeah, and one of the things that you and I have talked about is that you're seeing that space much more reflected, or it might even be vice versa. You're seeing the broadcast media space be reflected in the overall corporate space, and those two things are those two worlds are kind of melding together, whereas they used to maybe be very distinct in a TV studio or something like that. But now you're starting to see those things really start to come together in an interesting way. And I'm curious, more than anything, how you begin to tie some of those elements kind of all throughout a space, as opposed to it feeling very segmented.
Yeah, I mean, so here's like a good example. So like 10 years ago, when I started to do broadcasts, actually now, 20 years ago, it's been a while.
You don't have to admit that on on a recording. It's okay.
2000, started doing it in 2000. All right, 20 years ago. All right. broadcast was over here as kind of a project type, and interior architecture or office workplace was over here. And there was a big gap, right? You'd never have them cross over. Where it would be a black box studio here or a video production space, and where you work, and where a customer or a client would come in and experience the brand. Today, with with webcast and with technology in general, they're starting to they overlap, right? So as an example, you and I were just talking about this, but we had a completed a project for a financial services company in Chicago, and they were building, they owned the building, and they were building out the 5th floor. Well, what they wanted to do was have two things. They wanted to be able to have what we call like a media room, which is really like a video production space. But in addition to that, since they were creating content and they wanted there to be sort of a certain level of authenticity about where they produce that content, we kind of found and planned different areas within the 5th floor where they could just do impromptu, video content shoots. So, like the cafe was what we call kind of video ready. So the lighting was there, the shots were already planned with locked off cameras. And so we're kind of building video production spaces within an office workplace, which again, even 5-10 years ago didn't exist, let alone 20. So they're really starting to kind of do this. And that's not just for like traditional, like commercial broadcast clients. I mean, that's more like, corporate clients, whether it's financial services or professional sports or technology companies. So it's really, really pretty interesting. I mean, that's one of the reasons why a lot of I would say several of the large multinational architecture firms are starting or have already started, digital media groups in-house or, video production planning groups in-house.
That's really interesting. And one of the other things that I think is particularly interesting about this is that it's not just about having a media space or a video space, right? These types of spaces aren't just places to produce video. It's also it also helps communicate your brand identity and who you are as a brand, and serves more functions than just this is a place where we record video.
Yeah. I mean, so there's two big things that we help with, right? There's we've got to develop and crank out, whether it's internal, external, video. So we need a space for that. But then it's also like brand alignment in this kind of relatively new platform of video, right? But then the third consideration, which we are more and more getting asked, is how can we leverage the studio across, other opportunities? Meaning, like, how can we also make it a profit center? And so, this could happen. Well, I mean, this is happening in the financial services field a lot, and then also even professional sports, where you may have game day, or you may have, on the financial services company side, you may have certain content you need to produce. But what happens to the studio? How do you use the studio when your own content needs are already met? And so what's interesting is, I mean, obviously in sports, you have the opportunity to, bring a sponsor on for the naming rights or whatnot for the studio. But what's interesting is now you have, a flexible space where you could have, outside clients come and use the space, right? Because today we're developing and designing studios where, yes, it can be branded for the specific use that it's being designed for, but with technology being as it is, it allows you to like totally transform and rebrand the space. So not only can you use it for, my, I don't know, my, what would I have? I don't know. I don't even like baseball. My football team. Okay.
Yeah,
But you have the ability to use it not only for the football team or the professional sports, you're able to bring in other users that will pay to use that space, right?
that's a great point.
And so I think oftentimes, I mean, as I would too, I would be trying to figure out how to leverage the first costs of that studio across one, other budgets and other buckets of money in the organization, but then also use it as a way of attracting, third party revenue drive. So
That's a good point. This is something that I was a radio guy before I worked here, right? And in radio, they figured out that everything can and should be branded and sold in some way, or that's possible, right? So you have different branding on different things all over the place, and it can be different, revenue drivers depending on who you are and what you do and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a
yeah.
lot of possibility that exists in that area.
As much as we always have these similar conversations, there still is a lot of education that needs to happen, right? And so,
Yeah,
not only the types of clients that can use the studio, but also like how the studio can be used in different ways. So, like as an example, we've had multiple projects that kind of paired. In one example, they kind of leveraged the studio and their hospitality suite. So they had meeting and event space that they could do. They could cater events. That they had this wall that would open up the hospitality suite and space to the broadcast studio. And so in a way, the broadcast studio was kind of this value added amenity. Now, not that they were producing video in it, but it was kind of like an asset that was really amazing that made that hospitality suite really attractive. And as a result, they were just busy year long. So obviously studio leveraged through hospitality, but then there's several examples, but another example is that we had a studio that was built right next to an auditorium. And so what that allowed was obviously the studio could be used independently from the auditorium. But the cool thing was that if they ever wanted to, let's say, have a live audience, again, all they had to do was kind of lift up the air wall. And now you all of a sudden have, 300 seats, which is a lot, by the way, but 300 seats that had visual access, almost like a proscenium into the broadcast studio for live audiences. And so it allowed that client in particular to kind of, again, leverage the space that was right adjacent to it to widen the way in which they use the studio.
that's really interesting. And yeah, again, I guess provides a window into the types of possibilities. And I wonder, like you said, education is always a big part of this. And we've talked about that on the podcast before, but what are some questions that you frequently get on this? Or what are things that people don't know that you think maybe they should know or should be aware of as they think about, okay, what's possible for my facility? How do I want to utilize a space like that in our offices or in our, space and that sort of thing? What sorts of questions do you often get, and what do you want people to be thinking through?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the obvious questions is, how do we leverage this price tag across other opportunities, right? I mean, there are ways to do inexpensive, broadcast studios without a doubt, right?
Right.
There's places and clients, we have clients like that it makes sense. But when we're talking about like ground up facilities, for instance, or new headquarters, building building that asset in at the beginning versus after the fact is always easier to do. So one of the questions is, we're building this headquarters. Is
Hmm.
like huge as a way to leverage it. And then it becomes, potentially part of a marketing cost, right? That can be shared across departments. So that's one of the questions, is like, how do we leverage this new studio in this new, whether it's a headquarters or facility. The other thing that's happening, and that's for professional sports, but it's also happening specifically for us in financial services, where let's say it's a financial services company, and it's all about kind of us being thought leaders around, it could be financial trends, it could be corporate, it could be on the personal side or individual side. Once that studio is developed, being able to have prospective clients come in and see the studio, right? Where it's not just this black box studio that's kind of enclosed and nobody sees, but it actually
Hmm.
becomes uh, almost like a physical man. This sounds a little out there, but it almost becomes like a physical manifestation of your thought leadership around the content and the speciality that you have, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when prospective clients can come in and say, hey, not only are we producing content for our own out here, you now, as a potential client or as a client, have the ability to make content out of this facility as well, becomes a huge seller, right? And it's not
Hmm.
only is it it's really a differentiator, right? Um,
Right.
and so I think those are the trends that we're seeing. Now, not everybody is going to be doing large facility builds that need that level of planning and engagement, but at the end of the day, these spaces are integral into how companies are presenting themselves across the video platform.
Well, it's really interesting watching these trends kind of play out in real time and having these conversations with you about them, because yeah, it's certainly a as interesting of a time for video as I think I've ever seen, or we will maybe ever see, just because of the unique factors that are all kind of playing into this particular moment in time, and creating spaces, studio spaces that make the office a more appealing and attractive place to be. I think is also another part of this that for some companies can't be overstated. Right, having a place that people actually want to come back to as an office is part of this.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, one of the things that, as part of that, in terms of video production, is how do we create a place that's authentic, right? That tells very directly what we do and how we think about things. And whether it's integrating AV, meaning digital display technology, as an experience, right? Or leveraging that same AV technology within a video production studio, the, just the fact that that technology is now being incorporated provides for multiple ways of storytelling, and creating, again, I hate that it's like creating a brand, um really like a a brand experience through the AV that you can, or through the digital display technology that you can feel, and it becomes palpable, which is, I think it's cool. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to, especially now that people are returning to work from working remote, like we want to create something that's special, that's something that's unique, that when you come to the office, it engages you, right? And you feel like you're part of something that's larger that you can't experience at home. And using digital display technology to do that is one tool of accomplishing that.
Excellent stuff, Peter. As we come to the end of this particular conversation, this has been a fun one. I've really enjoyed getting a chance to kind of knock these topics around. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave our listeners with, or anything we haven't covered yet that you think, hey, people should know this?
Well, I think one of the things, I just thought about this. So I think one of the misconceptions about what we do and doing a studio is that inherently, I think people think that doing a broadcast or a video studio is a desk or a stand up next to a monitor, and it feels like you're in a studio. And one of the things, right? And so oftentimes when people look at, that we've done CNN or MSNBC or some of the hard news stuff, but not a lot of the corporate stuff, like, companies now want a studio that's flexible, but then is also kind of authentic and doesn't feel like, everybody knows that this is not this, but the studio is a space that you're designing, but people want to feel like it's not overly produced. And I think that one of the trends that I'm seeing in particular in terms of what clients want is, okay, we want a video production studio that doesn't feel like a video production studio, that feels authentic to where we're working. And so oftentimes, like, that's where I think for us and for me, like, I'm able to kind of pool our interior architecture and our architectural background to create a space that, yes, you can still tell it's a studio, but it isn't as formal, right? It's approachable. You feel like you're in a space that is more hospitality, like, less cold studio, not approachable, and scripted, right? That's the big thing. I mean, oftentimes the content that brands are producing, they really don't want it to be necessary. Like, it's scripted, but it doesn't feel scripted from a kind of an audience perspective.
Yeah.
That was a very long last comment, but I appreciate it. For sure.
No, I like it. And it was unscripted, just like you were talking about.
Yeah, there you go.
It's good. Peter Prevost, President and Director of Design at Prevost Studios. Peter, it's always fun having these conversations, getting to talk about some of the trends that you're seeing in the market and what's going on. It's been a pleasure, man.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everyone, make sure to tune in to future episodes of the show. Best way to do that is by visiting the Prevost Studio website or subscribing to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the latest insights from folks like Peter. And stay tuned. We'll be back soon with new episodes of the show. But for this one, for Peter Prevost, I'm Tyler Kern. We'll talk to you again soon.